In this video, we're going deep. Now, I think we spend just too much of our lives just skimming the surface, and we don't really go deep enough to find the nuances that are really the essence of what anything is all about. Take, for example, our breathing. We all used to think that it is our need for oxygen that makes us breathe, right? But actually, if we go deeper and actually find out about why we breathe, it's not the need for oxygen that makes us breathe. It's in fact our revulsion of carbon dioxide. You see, our body just hates carbon dioxide so much that when the carbon dioxide builds up, we want to get rid of it. So we breathe out. And when we breathe out, we have to replace it with another breath. It just so happens that the next breath has got oxygen in it. So the oxygen is not what makes us breathe, it's our revulsion of carbon dioxide. Now, in this video, we're going to go deep into COLORBOND roof replacements. Now, you see a lot of videos out there of roofers replacing an old tile roof with a brand new COLORBOND roof. And I think the bulk of these videos just basically skim across the surface. They show you what actually happens, maybe the beginning of the job and the end of the job, and at the end it all looks really pretty, right? But they don't really go into the nuances of what it's like to actually replace an old tile roof with a brand new COLORBOND roof. So this is what we're going to go deep into in this video. We're going to look at a typical roof here in Sydney, the congested inner city areas where there's an old tile roof, and now it's been converted to a brand new COLORBOND roof. So now the job has already been completed, and we're going to kind of go back in time to just look at the little details that's involved in getting tiles off a roof and replacing it with a COLORBOND roof. There are a lot of things that need to be taken into consideration when we do a job in the middle of Sydney. Now, before we even change a roof over, we've got to look at considerations like the local government controls. Is there any stipulation that any roof makeover has to be like for like? In other words, a tile roof has to be replaced with another tile roof. Or can a tile roof be changed over to a COLORBOND roof? And a lot of times, you don't really need to go and consult the council, because all you need to do is look at the surrounding houses in that suburb and see what's been done to them. So in this particular instance, we see that the roof next door has already been converted to COLORBOND, and there's a few roofs up the road which are now COLORBOND instead of the old tile roof. So in this instance, we can safely say that there's no council objections to swapping over an old tile roof with a new COLORBOND roof. Now, the next consideration is obviously access. How do we get onto the site? We have to consider parking, where we're going to park, and the very important material movement requirements for a roof replacement, because we've got to get in, we've got to get rid of the tiles, right? So the tiles have to come off. Do you actually put it in a bin? Do you store it? And in this instance, it's going to go into a tipper truck. And the advantage in a tipper truck is that you don't need a space for a bin to be kept, because some councils don't permit bins to be kept on the street. So we've got to consider how we're going to cart the old tiles away. We also have to look at whether the tiles are in demand by the roof tile recyclers, because if it's a fairly rare tile, we shouldn't be throwing the tiles away. They should be taken off and sold to the roof recyclers. Now, once we've decided where to get rid of the tiles and how to take it away, we've got to come up with a sequence of actually taking the tiles off the roof. Sometimes it's an advantage to take a section off at a time, because that means that the rest of the roof is intact and waterproof, and you take off a section at a time. You would replace it on the same day, and there's minimal amount of waterproofing required. The other option is to take as much of the tiles off as possible, because you've got to consider that you've got to have to fill up the tipper truck, and a full load or a full couple of loads, it may involve so many tiles that you can't actually replace those sections of roof in a day. So what do? you have to tarp those sections up. So the question is always, how much do you take off at any one day? Do you limit the amount of tarping, or do you have lots of tarps? And I guess a lot of that would depend on the forecast, because if you got a good dry spell, you can afford to take more tiles off and just tarp up overnight. But if there's bad weather approaching, then you shouldn't be looking at putting too many tarps on. It should be done at a small section at a time. So these are the considerations that has to be taken into account when we consider how much of the roof to strip and to replace. And in addition to that, we've also got to consider the strength of the tiles. There are some tiles that are so brittle that you can't walk on them without breaking them. So it means that in the process of stripping a section of the roof, you break a lot of tiles on the next section because you have to stand somewhere, right? Which means that there's a lot of broken tiles. You got to be careful that the broken tiles don't actually fall off the roof and hit the ceiling, and you've got a collapsed ceiling. It also means that if you've broken so many tiles, you can't keep replacing them. You've actually got to tarp that section up. Now, what happens when the tiles come off is that we got to decide on whether we keep the tile battens in place or take the tile battens out. And normally we leave the tile battens in place because the tile battens help brace the whole roof up, and you don't want to cause any disruptions to the actual rigidity of the roof. Now, there's one consideration that is very often disregarded, and perhaps it's a valid reason for Sydney roofs, maybe not, and it is the wind uplift. Because in very high wind areas, we've got to consider whether the lighter roof structure is going to be strong enough against wind uplift. And that means the requirements of some sort of engineering to figure out whether there's additional tie downs that is required to prevent the roof from popping up. And I think in Sydney, that's quite a minor consideration because of the sheltering of all the houses, and the actual uplift is not as great as if you had a house in the middle of nowhere. So very often in Sydney, additional structural tie downs are not really required. And now that we've stripped the roof bare and we've got a naked roof, what happens next? Well, usually we have to put new battens in. And the reason for new battens is that the old tile battens are just not strong enough or big enough to be screwed into, because the new roof sheets are screwed into the battens and not just laid on it. So that's the reason for requiring the new batten. And there's a few options on roof battens. You could have metal battens, you could have pine battens, and you can have the new reconstituted my battens. And you can tell at a distance the difference between the treated pine battens and the my battens, because one is a greeny color and the other one is red. And the advantage in the my battens is because it's a man-made product, it is a lot more weatherproof, so it doesn't warp and twist with the moisture content. It is nice and straight. Now on top of the battens we put a building blanket, and now the options are what type of building blanket. Now, in the old days, most building blankets were fiberglass based. And one of the problems with the fiberglass is that the roofers got really itchy because the fiberglass, little fibers, get into the skin and they get really itchy. And nowadays, a lot of roofers prefer to use earth wool. And the earth wool is not the pink or the yellow in color. It is a browny grey color. So that's how you tell the difference between earth wool and the fiberglass building blanket. So which building blanket do you choose? And not only that, the building blankets come with different grades of foil. You have the heavy duty foil, which is really heavy duty, and going to medium duty and to the light duty. Now, which foil backing you choose depends on the situation. And then you got the thickness of the insulation. Do you go for the standard 55mm thick insulation, or you bump it up to 75 or go to 100? And depending on the situation, you can go up or come down to the standard 55mm. And that's just talking about the material. The next thing is the actual lay of the building blanket, how the building blanket's actually laid. Now, when tilers lay their sarking, they go across the roof. Now, when metal roofers lay their blanket, they go up and down the roof. It's a different way of putting the underlay to the roofing. And a lot of it is to do with how the roof is laid, because when you lay a tile roof, you lay the tiles going across. When you lay a metal roof, you lay it up and down. That's one of the reasons why the blanket's always laid from the gutter to the apex. Now, there's two details when you lay the building blanket. One is at the gutter. Where exactly do you end, where you terminate the building blanket? How close to the gutter do you cut the building blanket? And as you go to the top ridge, how close to the top ridge is the building blanket actually cut? And the reason for this is because there's two considerations. One is that you don't want water wicking in because the blanket is too long. The other one, which is quite recent, is the subject of roof ventilation. Now, that means if the building blanket is too long near the gutter, it doesn't allow any air to come in. And if the building blanket is draped over the ridge board, then the air can't escape at the ridge. So really, to be able to comply with ventilation as much as possible, the building blanket has to be cut short at the ridge boards to allow for a gap so the air can escape, and if a correct ridge is put in, then the air can come out and out of the roof. Now, on the subject of ventilation and the new construction code, we've got this to consider. What is it? Well, it's an extraction fan. So under the new construction code, all extraction fans from bathrooms, kitchens, and laundries must go through the ceiling cavity via a duct and then onto the roof via some sort of a roof vent, like a whirlybird or some other vent. So now there are more and more things that we need to consider when we're replacing a roof. And after all we've been talking about, we're not even halfway there. So we're going to have to split this video in half. This is going to be part one, and part two is going to be more details about how the roof is flashings and the nitty-gritty of replacing a tile roof with a COLORBOND roof. And you thought a COLORBOND roof replacement was a simple job.